Hi class, hope you guys are doing well. Let's talk about citing sources in APA 7 style. In this particular lecture, we're going to talk about in-text references, or citations. Alright, so here and in the next mini lecture, we're going to cover the following. First of all, what are APA style citations and references? How do you cite sources in your paper? And how do you format your references? Now, we're going to focus on the first two and talk specifically about in-text citations. So when you write an APA style paper, you want to make sure that you credit the sources of the information you're citing and also credit sources that support your assertions, because you can make all sorts of statements and assertions, but you need to be able to back it up with evidence that's in the literature. There are a couple ways to credit your sources in an APA style paper. First, you want to use in-text citations in the body of your text. And then at the end of your paper, you want to list the source that you cited in the references list. And so right now we're going to focus on number one, which is your in-text citations. The purpose of the in-text citations is to support your assertions or specific information that you want to cite in your writing. And you would provide in-text citations within the body of your paper, or in the case of your research poster, it may be within your introduction, for example. Typically, the information you need in order to write your in-text citation would be the author's last names and the year of publication. And this is assuming that you're paraphrasing, so you're using your own words instead of using direct quotes. And that is generally the assumption here, so we're going to stick with this, which is that you're going to be typically writing your in-text citations using the author's names and year. A word about paraphrasing, and so what is it? So you might remember that paraphrasing is restating another person's idea in your own words. And so basically you're doing the writing. And that is the default and recommended practice in APA 7 style. And so in general, you would not be using direct quotes to replace your writing unless it's absolutely necessary. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But when you're paraphrasing, you might find ideas or data from a source, and then you would explain those in your own words and then provide that in-text citation. There are two main types of in-text citations. This format is probably very familiar to you. This is the parenthetical citation. So all of the citation, as you can see here at the end of the sentence, goes inside the parentheses. And then the second format is called a narrative format, where only the year goes inside the parentheses, and you write the author's names out in text as part of your sentence. And so these are the two forms, and you can choose either one. I would say parenthetical is probably more common, but sometimes you might find that the narrative form fits your writing better. So you can pick and choose which one is more comfortable for you. Now, when you format your in-text citations, your formatting largely depends on only two pieces of information. First of all, are you using a parenthetical or a narrative type of in-text citation? And then also, how many authors do you have? And that's pretty much it. This is what I mean. And so this is taken straight out of the APA style manual. I apologize to APA style manual folks for taking a picture of this, but you can see there is parenthetical versus narrative, and so they look different. And the form in which you write out these citations differ by the number of authors. And so I'd encourage you to study this chart carefully when you're trying to do your in-text citations. Now let's break this down just a little bit. First of all, the simplest form, of course, is when you have one author. And so you want to write their last name, and then comma, if you're using parenthetical citation, space, and then the year. And all of that goes inside the parentheses. The narrative form, as you know, has the author's last name outside of the parentheses. And so here's the author's last name, and then the year goes inside the parentheses. What if you have two authors then? Ta-da! I think many of you may be much better at pronouncing these names. Anyway, so if you have two authors though, you have these last names, two last names. So Garcia Carrion and Villanueva, probably botched it, I'm sorry, my Spanish-speaking friends. But these author last names are connected by an ampersand right here. So it's a symbol. So first author's last name, space, ampersand, space, and then the second author's last name, comma, space, year. And all of that goes inside, of course, parentheses. And then if you have a narrative citation, instead of an ampersand, you actually write out and a word, of course, and then space and space between the two authors, another space instead of a comma, there's just a space, and then the year in parentheses. And so, it's a little bit picky to kind of pay attention to these subtle differences, but you want to get your eyes trained on what these look like. Now, what if you have 3 or more authors? Fortunately, in APA 7th style, it's a little bit simpler because they just kind of condense it into et al. And so the first author's last name, Browning, and then space et space al, period, comma, space, 2014. And so et al. Is used to abbreviate second, third, and more authors. And so it's really only the first author's last name that you need to know. So Browning et al., comma, space, 2014. Narrative, same thing, except for that you don't use a comma after et al. So Browning et al., but no comma, just a space, and then the year in parentheses. Now, some of you thoughtful folks may be wondering, what if you have multiple works where you would abbreviate the citation as the exact same thing? So here's an example. So what if you have 2 works that end up as Chavez et al., 2016? So here are the 2 works that I've listed, right? Both of these abbreviate to Chavez et al. So what do? Well, I am just kidding, or am I? Of course, I'm kidding. You don't want to do that. That would be really confusing. And of course, people who want to read further based on your lovely paper will not be able to find the original references. And so what you want to do is to mention as many authors as you need to differentiate the 2 works. And so you notice that both of the works have Chavez and Luis, and then the third author is different. And so you can do Chavez Luis et al. For one of them, and then Chavez Luis and Bayer for another one to differentiate between the 2. So now people will be able to figure out which one you mean between the Chavez references that you have in your references list. Brilliant, right? Now, you probably know that APA style is very nitpicky. They really want you to have an eagle eye for all sorts of details. Here is a summary of some of the things that you want to pay attention to. First of all, when you do in-text citations, there's usually one space. There's really no instance I can think of where you would use 2 spaces to separate any element. So use one space in between things. And punctuation, there is a lot to pay attention to, but think about where the parentheses go. So you might remember that in the narrative citation, parentheses go around the year only, whereas in the parenthetical citation, it goes around the whole in-text citation. And then, of course, the use of ampersand we talked about in the instance where you have 2 authors. And then you also need to know where the comma goes. So et al. Comma is for the parenthetical citation, but when you write it out in a narrative form, you don't use the comma. Very, very small detail, but APA style apparently cares about that. And then the publication year is always at the end. I think that part you can probably remember pretty easily. Now, you might remember that we had discussed how direct quotes are typically not the way you would write in APA style. Now, you may use direct quotes, but use them only when absolutely necessary. So, for example, you're quoting an exact definition. You have a passage or a quote that is distinct, memorable, or succinct in such a way that you cannot represent it using your own writing or paraphrasing. Or you want to respond to exact wording provided by that author or another person. And so direct quotes, once again, use sparingly, do not use very often, use only when necessary. I think this is probably not a real quote by Albert Einstein, by the way. So what do you need in order to do direct quotes? You need the same information as before, which is you need the author's names and year, but now you need to also cite the page number or the location of that passage. And so in terms of page number, that applies to, for example, journal articles or books where there are page numbers available. If you don't have those available, for example, it's a website or some sort of an unpaginated resource that you are trying to cite, then you would also be able to cite instead a location, for example, information about that particular section or a paragraph number and so on. There are 2 types of direct quotes. So if you have a quote that is fewer than 40 words, then use short quotations. And these are the quotations that go into quotation marks and appear in your regular passage. Or you can use a block quotation for a long quotation of 40 words or more, where you would have an indent starting that quote on a new line. To save time and space for everyone, I'm not going to go into all of this information except for to point you to the resource that can help you out greatly should you need to use direct quotes. And so for more detailed information, including different cases of what you would do if you were missing page numbers or you need to cite certain types of information, please go ahead and use the link provided in the lecture slides to go to the APA Style blog, where all of this and more are explained in different types of contingencies and situations. In general, for this particular course, when you're writing, including for your research poster, you're expected to paraphrase information, and so you would be using the typical parenthetical or narrative in-text citations with just the authors in ear. All right, and so we have covered some of the most important information about what the in-text citations are and how you would cite sources. So let's practice what you've just learned. Enjoy the exercises that follow. I'm going to try to embed them in a quiz-like format on Canvas, and so let's give it a try. You will probably practice more repetitions than this doggy right here. All right, talk to you soon.